The Shire is a region of J.R.R. Tolkien's fictional Middle-earth, described in The Lord of the Rings and other works. The Shire refers to an area settled exclusively by hobbits and largely removed from the goings-on in the rest of Middle-earth. It is located in the northwest of the continent, in the large region of Eriador in the Kingdom of Arnor. Its name in Westron was Sûzat Shire, or Sûzat the Shire. Its name in Sindarin was Drann. Geography. According to Tolkien, the Shire measured 40 leagues from the Far Downs in the west to the Brandywine Bridge in the east, and 50 leagues from the northern moors to the marshes in the south. This is confirmed in an essay by Tolkien on translating The Lord of the Rings, where he describes the Shire as having an area of 18,000 square miles. The original territory of the Shire was bounded on the east by the Duin River, on the north by uplands rising to the old centre of Arnor, on the west by the White Downs, and on the south by marshland south of the river Shire. After the original settlement, hobbits also expanded to the east into Buckland between the Duin and the Old Forest, and to the west in the Westmarch between the White Downs and the Tower Hills. The Shire was originally divided into 4 farthings. The outlying lands of Buckland and the Westmarch were formally added after the War of the Ring. Within the farthings there are some smaller unofficial clan homelands. The Tooks nearly all live in or near Tuckborough in Tookland, for instance. A hobbit surname often indicates where the family came from. Samwise Gamgee's last name derives from Germich, where the family originated. Buckland was named for the Old Bucks. The Shire is described as a small but beautiful, idyllic and fruitful land, beloved by its inhabitants. The hobbits had an extensive agricultural system in the Shire but were not industrialized. The landscape included small pockets of forest. Various supplies were produced in the Shire, including cereals, fruit, wood and pipeweed. Regions of the Shire. The original parts of the Shire were subdivided into 4 farthings. The 3 farthing stone marked the tri-point where the borders of the East Farthing, West Farthing and South Farthing of the Shire came together, by the East Road. It is claimed that the 3 farthing stone was inspired by the 4 Shire stone. Buckland, across the Duin River to the east, and the Westmarch, between the Far Downs and the Tower Hills to the west, were not part of the original grant to the hobbits by King Argelb II of Arthedain. These were formally given to the hobbits as the east and west marches of the Shire by King Elisar after the War of the Ring, in SR 1462. Buckland had been long settled by then. Gohendad Old Book led hobbits from the East Farthing across the river in TA 2340, and Buckland became sort of a colony of the Shire. There is no mention of settlement in the Westmarch until Elisar's gift. Sam Gamgee's daughter Elena and her husband Fastard later settled there, and Fastard was created Warden of Westmarch. North Farthing. The North Farthing was the least populous part of the Shire. It was where most of the Shire's barley crop was grown, and the only farthing where heavy snow was frequent. The historic Battle of Greenfields was fought here. Bindbellwood was one of the larger forests of the Shire. It was misspelled Bindbellwood in the first Ballantine paperback edition, and the misspelling has been carried forward in many commentaries, including Foster's Guide and Fonstad's Atlas. The village of Hobbiton was the home of the Brosigirdle family, to whom Lobelia ap the Baggins belonged. Tolkien's unfinished index to The Lord of the Ring places Hobbiton in the South Farthing. But in Tolkien's more extensive entry in his Guide for Translators, it is located explicitly in the North Farthing. Longcleave was the home of a set of the Took clan, descendants of Bandabra's Bulroa Took known as the North Tooks, who settled here after the Battle of Greenfields. West Farthing, the western part of the Shire. It extended from the 3 farthing stone west to the Far Downs, and included the White Downs. Delving on the White Downs was the chief town of the Shire. Its name means simply large excavation. The mayor of Delving, with a 7-year term, was the only elected official of the Shire. At the time of the War of the Ring, the mayor was Will Whitfoot, the fattest hobbit in the West Farthing. Delving was the location of the Magham House, a museum for old items, including for a time Bilbo Baggins's mithril chainmail coat. Little Delving was a village to the north of Delving. Waymead grew up at the junction of the Great East Road with the branch of the South Road that came up from the Barren Dune at Sarn Ford. Tuckborough was the centre of the Took homeland where most Tooks dwell. The Thane's extended family lived here in the Great Smeals. The second element borough is a homonym for burrow, which is a common Hobbit surname. If Tuckborough is read as Tookborough, it becomes one of a class of Hobbitish de Ginga unregistered trademark names, that includes Michel Delving, the Lockholes, the Town Hall. Bywater was a village situated on the East Road along a natural pool in the stream called the Water, a river running through the centre of the Shire. The Green Dragon was a large inn located at the western end of the village, on the road to Hobbiton. The village was the site of the Battle of Bywater on 3 November TA. 3019, the last battle in the War of the Ring. Rushock Bog was a swampy area along the water, situated near the town of Needlehole. Hobbiton was a village on a stream locally known as the Water, a short distance west of Bywater. It had a mill, and there was a small inn called the Ivy Bush at the eastern end of the village, on the road to Bywater. The part of the village on the north of the river was known as Hobbiton across the water. This included the hill, with Bag End and the neighbourhood of Underhill on the south, and Overhill on the north of the hill. The hill road runs north from Bagshot Row and continues onward to Overhill. On the north bank of the water in Hobbiton was the mill, with a large water wheel and a yard behind it. Sandyman the miller owned the mill and operated it with the help of his son Ted Sandyman. Lottasack the Baggins had the old mill knocked down and the new mill built in its place. The new mill was an ugly red brick building with a tall chimney. It was bigger than the old mill and full of wheels and strange contraptions to increase production. The new mill straddled the water and poured pollutants into the stream. It was operated by men, and Ted Sandyman stayed on to help them. When Saruman came to the Shire in September 3019, the mill was no longer used for grinding grain but for some industrial purpose. And loud noises, smoke, and filth issued from it. After Saruman was killed and the chief's men defeated at the Battle of Bywater, the new mill was removed. Bag End was a luxurious tunnel, or smeal, on the north side of Hobbiton built into the top of the hill, circa TA. 2885, by the wealthy and respected Bungo Baggins of the same town's namesake as a wedding gift to his bride Belladonna Took, a daughter and one of numerous children of the Shire's Thane, the great Gerontius Took. The hall, where many parties took place, had one level with many rooms and cellars. Only rooms on the west had windows, which opened out like portholes onto a grassy slope and distant meadows beyond. The main entrance to the tunnel sat on the end of a westwardly hilltop gated path at the end of an anonymous lane, off of the hill road. Bungo and Belladonna died relatively young by Hobbit standards, having given birth to Bilbo who became in his adult bachelorhood its first heir. The tunnel's main entrance connected outdoors by an informal path both to Eriador and a second path partway down the garden's slope to a low rise in a hedgerow and further on into hedgerow country. Other than the anonymous lane's entrance pathway, the hill road's lone offshoot was Bagshot Row, just to the south of Bag End, a lane built on top of fill from spoil literally tossed over the south side of the hill while Bag End was being excavated. Bilbo later added a potato garden to the western slope when Hamfast Gaffer Gamgee, of number 3, Bagshot Row became its full-time gardener in TA. 2961. The next-door neighbour to Gamgee was Daddy Twofoot of number 2, Bagshot Row. Gamgee himself often employed Holman Greenhand who lived in a hut south of the water. The smeal, or hole, which Bilbo would often lock and leave for days at a time, leaving the keys with the Gamgees, was unexpectedly visited by Gandalf and a party of dwarves in TA. 2941 causing Bilbo to suddenly disappear on the quest of Erebor, not returning until over a year later, where he was just in time to prevent its being auctioned. In TA. 2980 Bilbo eventually made an heir, his nephew from the Shire's East River country, Master Frodo Baggins, an orphan by way of a highly controversial river-boating drowning accident. Born on the same date, Bilbo urged his junior nephew to reside with him so the two could celebrate their respective birthday parties together. The two lived at the Smeal until their joint birthday party of TA. 3001 When Bilbo disappeared from the Shire, leaving Frodo the Hole's master. A large disused field in front of Bagshot Row was leased by Bilbo to pitch tents to stage his disappearance. Frodo himself left the Shire, in Ta. 3018, on his quest to destroy the One Ring. In preparation for this he sold the Smeal to his cousins, Lobelia Sackville Baggins and her son Lottu. During the War of the Ring, the fallen wizard Saruman and his henchmen evicted Lobelia and murdered Lottu, taking Bag End for themselves. When Frodo returned to the Shire at the end of the war, the squatters were dealt with summarily, and Frodo resumed his residence. Samwise Gamgee soon moved in as well, together with his new wife Rose Cotton. However, in only a few short years, Frodo left Middle-earth altogether, leaving Sam and his growing family as its masters for generations. The author borrowed Bag End from the name of his aunt's farmhouse in the Worcestershire village of Dormston. It was supposedly intended as a translation of the word Laban Neck in the fictional Westron language. This had much the same meaning, and a similar relationship, to Labangi as Bag End to Baggins. South Farthing. The South Farthing was the site of Longbottom, where the best pipeweed was grown, owing to the area's warmer climate. The area was also known for the production of wine, principally old vineyards. The Greenhill Country, a region of rolling countryside in the central part of the Shire, extended into both the South Farthing and the East Farthing. At Longbottom, Tobold Hornblower introduced the cultivation of pipeweed to the Shire with plantations in his garden, circa Ta. 2670. The Overburn Marshes, a swampy area along the western bank of the Beryn Duin, across the river from the mouth of the Withywindle. The River Shire Bourne flowed through the marshes into the Beryn Duin just south of Haysund. Sarn Ford was the stony ford across the Beryn Duin on the southern borders of the Shire. An ancient road which left the Great East Road at Waymeet crossed the ford and joined the Greenway farther east. The Rangers guarded this entrance to the Shire, but in October, Ta. 3018, the Nazgul hunting for the One Ring drove them off. Some of the Nazgul crossed in the Shire, while others followed the Rangers toward the Greenway. East Farthing. The East Farthing bordered Buckland and contained the towns of Frogmerton and Whitfurrows on the ancient Great East Road, and the farms of the Marish. The farmers near the Brandywine River largely acknowledged the authority of the Old Bucks, even after the latter moved across the river and became the Brandybucks. The Marish was the name of fertile but marshy farmlands along the Brandywine River. The Marish had been settled about 30 years after the Shire had been created, by Stures who had arrived there from Dunland. The Marish was important in Shire history as the home of Bucca, the first of the Shire Thanes. Gohendad Oldbuck, one of his descendants, crossed the Brandywine and founded Buckland. Farmer Maggot, a grower of turnips and mushrooms, lived at Bamfurlong in the Marish. The Causeway Road ran across the Marish and roughly parallel to the west bank of the Brandywine, between Stock and Rushay. Stock was the major town of the Marish and the location of the Golden Perch, an inn with a reputation for excellent beer. The Stock Road was a road that ran eastwards from Tuckborough in the West Farthing across the Greenhill country and past the Yale to Stock. Scary was a village in the northern part of the East Farthing at the southern feet of the hills of Scary. A road ran south from Scary to cross the water at Budgeward and join the Great East Road at Whitfurrows. During the War of the Ring, provisions were stored in the quarry east of Scary by the chief's men, and after the scouring of the Shire the Hobbits took advantage of these stores for the Yule holiday. Woody End was a forested upland near the village of Woodhall. Frodo and his friends, on their journey to Buckland, encountered Gild's party there. This was not entirely coincidental, as the Woody End was a traditional sojourn for the High Elven Aldr on their occasional journeys across Eriador. Gild's party was on pilgrimage, and their route was ancient, possibly dating back to the primeval Great Journey of the Elves in the First Age. The vegetation in the Woody End included stands of ancient oaks and brakes of hazel. There were also occasional elm and ash trees. The Yale was a low-lying farming area shown on the Shire map between the Stock Road and the East Road. This was the homeland of the Boffin family, and several Boffins and a genealogical table came from the Yale. Buckland, not originally part of the Shire, Buckland lay east of the Beryn Duin River. The area was protected from the nearby Old Forest by the High Hay, a tall hedge which formed the eastern border of Buckland, running from the Brandywine Bridge in the north to the confluence of the Withywindle with the Beryn Duin near the village of Haysund in the south. The main entrance to Buckland from the north was a gate in the Hay, called variously the Buckland Gate, the North Gate, or the Hay Gate, located, where the hedge runs down to the riverbank, just this side of the bridge, opening onto the east road from the Shire to Bree. Unlike other hobbits, the Bucklanders were more prepared for danger and less naive than the Shire hobbits. They closed the Hay Gate and locked their own front doors at night, and had a warning signal, the Horn of Buckland, to enable quick mobilization. Most Bucklanders were originally of Stewart stock, and they were the only hobbits known to use boats. Bucklebury was the main town of Buckland. The Master of Buckland, hereditary chieftain of the Brandybuck clan, maintained his home here at Brandy Hall. The Bucklebury Ferry, a raft ferry some 10 miles south of the bridge, provided another crossing of the Brandywine from the Shire to Buckland. It was unmanned, to be used by hobbits as needed. En route to the new house at Crickhollow, Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin crossed the river using the ferry just ahead of one of the Black Riders, who was forced to go around to the Brandywine Bridge since no boats were kept on the western bank of the river. Crickhollow was a hamlet in Buckland. After selling Bag End, Frodo Baggins moved to a house in Crickhollow. Mriadat Brandybuck and Frediga Bolga prepared the house ostensibly for Frodo to occupy in retirement, but the purchase of the house was a ruse to allow Frodo and Samwise Gamgee to leave the Shire unobtrusively. Merry and Pippin lived for some time after their return to the Shire in the house at Crickhollow. Westmarch, after the events of the War of the Ring at the start of the Fourth Age, King Elisar granted the hobbits of the Shire effective self-rule inside his reunited kingdom, banning any men from entering the land without the permission of the hobbits. He also granted the Shire a stretch of new land. This reached from the ancient western borders of the Shire, the Far Downs, to the Tower Hills. The area between the Downs and the hills became known as the Westmarch. Like Buckland, it was not part of any of the four Farthings. The eldest daughter of Mayor Samwise Gamgee, Elena the Fair, married Fastard of Greenham, and they moved to the Westmarch, settling in Undertowers. After the passing of Master Samwise into the Grey Havens, they and their children became known as the Fairbairns of the Towers or Wardens of Westmarch. The Red Book of Frodo and Bilbo Baggins passed into their keeping, becoming known as the Red Book of Westmarch. Inspiration: on Tolkien's maps, the Shire is located at about the same position as England is on modern European maps and has been cited as an example of Merry England ideology. Throughout the narrative, Tolkien also implies numerous points of similarity between the two, such as weather, agriculture and dialect. In particular, the central part of the Shire corresponds to the West Midlands region of England, extending to Worcestershire, Gloucestershire, Shropshire, Warwickshire, Herefordshire and Staffordshire, as argued by Tom Shippey, forming a cultural unit with deep roots in history. The North Farthing, with its heavy snowfalls, may correspond to Yorkshire or the Lake District, while the South Farthing lay far enough south to support the cultivation of wine and tobacco. Tolkien said that pipeweed flourishes only in warm sheltered places like Longbottom. In the 17th century, Worcestershire, in particular the area of Evesham, was well known as an area where tobacco was cultivated. The name Shire harks back to T.H. White's book England Have My Bones, where White says that he lives in the Shire. Hooker observes that the Sindarin Drann is a loan word from Welsh, where Tran means district, or a region. The Welsh word Tran will mutate to Drann under certain grammatical conditions, for example, when it is preceded by the Welsh definite article y. The industrialisation of the Shire was based on Tolkien's childhood experience of the blighting of the Worcestershire countryside by the spread of heavy industry. The rebellion of the Hobbits and the restoration of the pre-industrial Shire may be interpreted as a prescription of voluntary simplicity as a remedy to the problems of modern society. Saruman, the character responsible for the pollution of the Shire, derives his name partly from Sarehole Mill, in the vicinity of which Tolkien spent the most idyllic period of his childhood. The Shire is imagined as the West Midlands in a more remote past, akin to the Old English Kingdom of Mercia, aspects of which serve also as a model for the Mark of the Rohirrim. History: the Shire was first settled by hobbits in the year 1601 of the Third Age. They were led by the brothers Marcho and Blanco. The hobbits had migrated west over the perilous Misty Mountains in the decades before that, and before entering the Shire they had lived in Dunland and parts of the depopulated Arnorian splinter realms Cardoon and Utah. It has been speculated that the hobbits had originally moved west to escape the troubles of Mirkwood, and the evil caused by the Easterlings. The Shire was a part of Arthedain, and as such a part of Arnor. The hobbits obtained official permission from King Argelb Tued Norbury to settle the lands, which were no longer populated and were seen as the king's hunting grounds. The king stipulated 3 conditions to this grant. That the hobbits should acknowledge his lordship, that they should maintain the roads within the Shire, and finally that they should aid his messengers. The hobbits therefore considered themselves subjects of the king and sent some archers to the great battles Arnor fought against Angmar. After the fall of Arnor, the Shire remained a minor but independent, self-governing realm. The chiefs of the clans elected an official named the Thane to hold the king's powers after the North Kingdom fell. The first Thanes were the heads of the Old Book clan. The position later came to be held by the Tooks. Its small size, relative lack of importance, and brave and resilient hobbit population made it too modest an objective for conquest. More importantly, the Shire was guarded and protected by the Da'ar and Nadain Rangers, who watched the borders and kept out intruders. The only strangers to enter the Shire were the dwarves travelling on the great road that ran through the Shire to and from their mines in the Blue Mountains, and the occasional elves on their way to the Grey Havens. This peaceful situation changed after Bilbo Baggins's acquisition of the One Ring in the year 1341 of the Shire Reckoning. Shortly after the beginning of the events described in The Lord of the Rings, the Shire was first visited by the 9 ring-wraiths and then captured by Saruman through his underling Lotta Sackville Baggins, who turned the Shire into a police state and began a massive campaign to industrialize it, bringing widespread misery and severely damaging its ecology. It was liberated with the help of Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin after the end of the Quest of the Ring through their victory at the Battle of Bywater. After Aragorn's return as the King of Arnor and Gondor, the Shire became a protected enclave inside the reunited kingdom. Aragorn is known to have issued an edict that forbade the entrance of full-sized men into the Shire. The Shire was soon restored with magic soil from Galadriel's La-Cubed Rien Garden. The year SR 1420 was considered by the inhabitants of the Shire to be the most productive and prosperous year in their history. Government: the Shire was a voluntarily orderly society. The only government services were the message service and the watch, the police, whose officers were called sheriffs, and whose chief duties involved rounding up stray livestock. The total number of regular sheriffs was 12, 3 for each farthing. There was also a somewhat larger and fluctuating number of bounders, a kind of unofficial border control. At the beginning of The Lord of the Rings, there were many more bounders than had been required for centuries, and they were unusually busy, one of the few signs obvious to the hobbits of the Shire of the troubled times. To a large extent, individual families and clans handled their own internal affairs. Where a prominent family was associated with a certain district, the head of that family would also exercise a kind of authority over his area. Thus, the Master of the Hall or Master of Buckland, hereditary head of the Brandy-Buck clan, was the effective ruler of Buckland. The title Master of the Hall comes from his more immediate authority over Brandy Hall, the greatest of the dwelling places of the Brandy-Buck family, filling Buckhill and Bucklebury. The Master also exercises a good deal of authority in the Marish, a region of the East Farthing just across the Brandywine River from Buckland. Similarly, the head of the Took clan, often just called the Took, ruled the ancestral Took dwelling of Great Smeals, the village of Tuckborough, and the wider area known as the Tookland. There were only 2 Shire-wide officials, the Thane and the Mayor. The Thaneship was a hereditary office, set up after the collapse of the Kingdom of Arthedain, to hold the king's authority over the Shire. In practice, the Thane's duties were limited, mostly related to defence. The Thane was the master of the Shire Moot, and captain of the Shire Muster and the Hobbitry in Arms. But as muster and moot were only held in times of emergency, which no longer occurred, the Thaneship had ceased to be more than a nominal dignity. Nevertheless, the feeling remained widespread that, in the absence of a king, the Thane was the source for all proper authority in the Shire, and during Saruman's intervention in the Shire in SR 1419, Thane Paladin II, aided by many hobbits and particularly his Took clan, led armed opposition to Saruman's forces from his capital at Tuckborough. When Frodo Baggins left the Shire at the outset of The Lord of the Rings SR 1418, the office of Thane had existed for 1,039 years. The first Thane, Bucker of the Marish, took office in SR 379. He and his 11 successors of the Old Book family held the Thaneship for 361 years. When Gohendad Oldbook led his family to settle Buckland, the office of Thane passed to Isombras I, head of the Took family, which held the Thaneship ever since. In SR 1418, the Thane was Paladin II, the 31st Thane and the 19th of the Took line. Thanes of the Shire include, Bucker of the Marish, 11 Thanes of the Old Book line, possibly including Gohendad Oldbook, who removed to Buckland in 740, Isombras I Took, 8 Thanes of the Took line, Isingram II, Isombras III, Ferumbras II, 14bras I Gerontius, the Old Took, Isingram III, Isombras IV, 14bras II, Ferumbras III, Paladin II, Peregrine, Faramir. The chief official of the Shire was the Mayor of Michel Delving. Elected every 7 years at the free fair held on the White Downs in the West Farthing, the Mayor was the postmaster and first sheriff of the Shire. The hobbits of the Shire generally obeyed the rules, that is, the ancient laws of the North Kingdom, and there was no real need to enforce them. All hobbits voluntarily obeyed them as they were both ancient and just. Hobbits had lawyers, but these dealt mostly with wills and such matters. There is no record of a formal court system, still less of criminal prosecutions or punishments. Frodo stated that in the Shire no hobbit had ever been known intentionally to kill another hobbit. Smaug Copyright Aggle's wicked behavior, including his murder of Dour Copyright Aggle, led Frodo to doubt that Smaug Copyright Aggle was a hobbit at all. Of course, it is probable that Smaug Copyright Aggle's treachery was the result of the ring's influence. The books make it clear that the ring could tempt individuals to perform terrible acts. At the resumption of the throne by King Elisar, the Shire again became part of the restored Kingdom of Arnor. Elisar permitted the hobbits to keep their own laws and customs. In 1427, Elisar issued an edict prohibiting men from entering the Shire and declaring it a free land under the protection of Arnor. Adaptations film The Shire makes an appearance in both the 1977 The Hobbit and the 1978 The Lord of the Rings animated films. In The Lord of the Rings motion picture trilogy, the Shire appeared in both The Fellowship of the Ring and The Return of the King. The Shire scenes were shot at a location in Matamata, New Zealand. Following the shooting, the area was returned to its natural state, but even without the set from the movie the area became a prime tourist location. The Shire was revisited by Peter Jackson for The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. The Shire scenes were shot at the same location in Matamata, New Zealand. Unlike the previous set, Hobbiton was constructed out of permanent materials so that it will last for several decades. Games In the 2006 real-time strategy game The Lord of the Rings, The Battle for Middle-earth 2, the Shire appears as both a level in the Evil campaign where the player invades in control of a goblin army, and as a map in the game's multiplayer skirmish mode. In the 2007 MMORPG The Lord of the Rings Online, the Shire appears almost in its entirety as one of the major regions of the game. The Shire is inhabited by hundreds of non-player characters, and the player can get involved in hundreds of quests. The only portions of the original map by Christopher Tolkien that are missing from the game are some parts of the West Farthing and the majority of the South Farthing. A portion of the North Farthing also falls within the in-game region of Avendum for gameplay purposes. In the 2009 action game The Lord of the Rings, Conquest, the Shire appears as one of the game's battlegrounds during the Evil campaign, where it is raised by the forces of Mordor. In the 2011 role-playing video game The Lord of the Rings, War in the North, the Shire appears briefly in a cutscene showing the Nazgul breaking through the Rangers' defenses at Sarn Ford. Games Workshop also produced a supplement in 2004 for the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game entitled The Scouring of the Shire, This supplement contained rules for a large number of miniatures that depicted the Shire after the War of the Ring had concluded. See also: Thanes of the Shire, List of Hobbit families, Gandalf. References. External links: The Shire at Tolkien Gateway, The Shire at the Encyclopedia of Arda, The Shire at the Lord of the Rings Online Wiki. Works cited: Stanton, Michael N. Shire, The In Drought, Michael D. C. J. A Tolkien Encyclopedia, Scholarship and Critical Assessment. Routledge pages 607-608. ISBN 0-415-96942-5. J. R. Tolkien, Guide to the Names in The Lord of the Rings, in Jard Lubdell, A Tolkien Compass, Open Court, 1975. Hammond and Skull, The Lord of the Rings, A Reader's Companion, HarperCollins, 2005. Robert Foster, The Complete Guide to Middle-earth, Ballantine Books, 1978.